Hello, welcome back to the shop. Today we are in the worm room. The worm the forget it. Today we're going to take a look at the worm bins, and it's been 12 days or so since I've been into the bin, so they're probably pretty hungry. I've got a lot of food to feed them today, so I'm hoping they're pretty hungry. I've just been real busy this last week and didn't really make a big effort to get in here and feed them because I knew I had a big feeding coming up for them. So 12 days since I've been in here. I'm gonna have my phone turned the right way this time. But this is the worm bin after 12 days. It did have a piece of paper on top. The worms apparently got kind of hungry because they did away with the paper, which that will tend to happen if you cover your bin with plastic, because that paper will get moist from the recirculating moisture, and they love it, and they end up taking that paper out pretty quickly. So what I like to do first in my bins before I start feeding or anything, oh yeah, last week, it hasn't been 12 days. I remember it was last Friday, 1 week ago. I prepped my garden, and there was still green lettuce stuff in my garden that had survived the winter because I put plastic over it at the beginning of the winter, and it had kept from freezing. But this last couple weeks where we had this big winter freeze, it did it in, and so I had some of this that I went ahead and threw into this bin. So 7 days ago was the last feeding, and it was Swiss chard. That's what this is, Swiss chard. And Swiss chard tends to do pretty good in cold weather, but I never thought it would survive the whole winter, and it did pretty good. I was totally surprised. Just a clear piece of plastic over it, and it managed to survive until it was below freezing for 2 weeks. And not only below freezing, it was like 16 below zero. So it got kind of cold. So I like to first off agitate all my material, get it all mixed up. That'll move any of the paper shreds that still remain around. Get them, any that are on the top and dried out, and it'll get them back down to some moisture so that they can be eaten. At this point, all that's left of the paper, on January 2nd, 1 month after the initial build, I added another massive amount of paper to this bin. And because they got through that first month, they got through all that paper that I added on December 2nd to start the bin off. They got through it in 1 month. So I added about the same amount again, and because I knew 30 days just wasn't enough time, so figured I wanted to harvest this around the beginning of March for my garden, and so I figured I'd add another big batch of paper to it so that I'd have more castings, and that's what I did. And now the only paper that remains, and it's been a month and almost 2 months since I added that paper, and they went through that paper a lot slower. I think when I first started the bin, I think I used mostly newspaper, and whenever I added it on January 2nd, I think it was mostly bleached white paper. Now, bleached white paper, your standard office paper, it takes I would say 3 times longer, maybe more, to break down than what newspaper does. Newspaper, I think, because it don't have the, I don't know, it's not, maybe it's thinner, but it breaks down quite a bit quicker. And the bleached white paper takes a little longer. But the only paper that seems to be remaining in this bin is the little bits from the top of the bin and anywhere it was clumped. See, like this clump of shredded paper where it's got, 6 or 7 pieces stuck together. Those are hard to get to break down unless you break them up. And so those take a lot longer to break down. And that's about all that's left, is anywhere it was clumped up. And 12 days ago, I had put tomatoes in here. And maybe 6 green tomatoes that were left from my garden last year. And just a tiny little bit of that remnants. So like I say, once a week or so, I come in here and I really, before feeding, I really mix the soil up good for one, to aerate the soil and get, air to all of the soil. That's how worms breathe. They absorb oxygen out of the dirt. So I like to make sure there's plenty of oxygen in all of the dirt just by aerating it, getting some air in there. It's probably not necessary, but it makes a huge difference on the quality of your castings. And there's another clump of the paper. So I usually try to shake it apart, make it break down a little faster. But so that's a pretty good, massive amount of castings for less than 3 months so far. Corn. I always have a bowl right handy with me, that anything that I find in the bin that I don't like in the bin, I can take out. Sometimes it's pumpkin seeds or butternut squash seeds, stuff like that, and I can just throw it in the bucket so that it can be dumped in the trash later. So it's always good to have a trash bucket handy for when you're going through your bin. The plants, if you ever have any seeds that turn to little plants, those are fine. The worms will eat them. I always just take and smash the root ball off and then leave the plant for the worms to break down. Alright, I'm going to leave those greens there and that way I can mix it with the food when I add the food here in a little bit. This is my second bin. This one is mostly Redwigglers, but I think there might be some European Nightcrawlers in here. For some reason, I can't even remember how I handled this bin. No, maybe. So this tells me that the paper that was in that top bin had been a little tattered when I reused it, because this paper still exists, although barely. It exists a lot better than the paper that was in the top one. So these papers were brand new last Friday when I brought that garden leaves in here. And It's not in that good a shape, but we'll keep it together as much as we can. Yeah, that one's not got much to use. Now we'll do the same thing here. We'll just quickly mix this around. Got corn on the cob. That's been in here for, I don't know, probably 3 or 4 weeks. Banana. I'd put, I think, a whole banana, not a whole banana. I ate half the banana, put the other half in here, banana and all. And that was, I think that might have was in that 12-day ago feeding. That couldn't have been 12 days. That must have been last Friday also, because I'm not finding any green leaves in here. So I must have gave these guys my banana and no leaves last Friday. I need to probably document my feedings a little better. They still have a little bit of the tomato left from what was 12 days ago. For some reason I was thinking that was the last time I was in here, but it wasn't. Last Friday was the last day I was in here. But the tomatoes was from 12 days ago. That I can be for sure of. That one's still got quite a bit left. I'm gonna start probably documenting things a little better. Maybe start making these videos on a little regular basis and trying to get a little better at making these videos. I do enjoy making these videos, but I have to get a better process down to where these videos don't take an hour. And that, and this is my Redwiggler bins. There might be some European Nightcrawlers in that one, but I don't think so. I think it's all Redwigglers. And this one, I do know, is a mixed bin of European Nightcrawlers and Redwigglers. These guys, I know they got some of that Swiss chard leaves as well. But these guys tend to get through stuff a heck of a lot faster than the other bins. And I think the worm population in this bin is pretty significant. This was once my outdoor bin, but in the fall I brought it inside because I made a mistake and left the lid off, and then it rained and about drowned all my worms. And so I brought it inside, and then it started getting cold, so I just left it inside, and it's been doing really, really good. It's a year old at this point. And this bin has just had about everything, and anything I didn't want to really put in my other bins, I put in this one and let them get through it. Even if it took them extra time or whatever, like the stalk of the Swiss chard, I wouldn't put it in my other bins just because it takes so long to break down. But I'll put it in this one. This one kind of gets all the overflow. And the worms seem to dig it. The worms are doing really good in this bin. The quantity of worms in this bin is pretty significant. And I can't get all the way down to the bottom without taking forever in this bin, so I'll just try to get down as far as I can in as much area as I can. The consistency of the castings feels good. It's a little muddy, a little extra sticky, but this is stuff that the worms have been through so many times because it hasn't been harvested in a year. And you'll notice if you let your castings go a year, and so they get processed and reprocessed and reprocessed by the worms, that they get, even when the moisture level is appropriate, they still seem like very sticky, very muddy. See how it kind of clumps together, where when I come up here to this one, it's very not clumpy. And that's because this bin is only almost 3 months old now, and this one's a year. So this one, the worms have probably processed all that material dozens and dozens of times, and it really made it very concentrated. So we'll probably try and harvest this bin by the end of March. That's my goal. And then my goal is to harvest all 3 of these by the end of March. And they're getting pretty close to ready, but they're not quite there yet. So I keep my worm room about 70 degrees. Sometimes if it's don't get real cold at night, it will get up to 75. Maybe even some mornings it'll be almost 80 in here if we have a night that it only gets down into the 40s, like we had one night last week that somehow no, it was this week, it was like Monday or Tuesday, only got down to like 40 degrees overnight, and whenever I came in that morning it was like 80 degrees in here. So the thermostat on my little heater isn't working all that great, but I try to keep it around 70 degrees in here. And the main reason I do that is because that is the temperature the worms tend to like. It gets the worms most active for mating. And I've really been trying to focus on my worm population and getting them built up. Since finding out a couple secrets I don't know if they're secrets or standard knowledge, but once I figured out that the recirculating moisture and having a layer of paper down on the bin and then putting your plastic over the top of that paper and making sure that there's a means for the worms to get up through that paper easily. So usually I use 2 strips of paper, and then it's open on each edge, down the middle, and on each edge. And usually, since they can get up through that paper nice and easy, they just cover that paper because that moisture is recirculating on it. They enjoy the clean water, and usually With it being keeping it at temperature, it's been a lot of mating going on in these two bins this winter, where last winter I didn't keep it as good at temperature, and my population really suffered through the winter last year. So this year I'm really hoping for a much better population as we come out of winter. Anyway, back to the feeding. I have a farmer buddy who found out about my worms, and so he saves me all his kitchen foods, and once every couple weeks he brings them by. He saves all his coffee, and it gets kind of nasty in here. I did throw this in the freezer when he brought it by the day before yesterday, and then I took it out of the freezer earlier so it could thaw. And sometimes I'll chop it up into smaller bits, and sometimes I'm kind of picky about it, but today I'm just going to open up a big hole, and I'm going to feed them on this right side because I want to feed them a pretty big feeding, and I want them to have all this area that they can go to if the bin gets hot. I don't want to feed them in the middle and then they only got two small areas. I want to feed them all the way to one side so they can have all this area. If this stuff starts decomposing and gets hot, I want to give them the most room to get away from it. Anyway, that's my plan. I usually have some thought process behind what I do. Not that it's always correct or that it matters at all, but that's why I'm doing it. Whether or not it makes great sense or not, that's my plan. And we're going to start with this coffee and a couple avocados, which I've been hearing work really good to bait out those mites. So I'm going to actually take those out, and we're going to toss those up there, and we're going to use those near the top surface to try and get some mites out of these bins. The mites aren't horrible in these bins, but I always try to get as many out as I can when I can, so having these avocado skins will help. I'll be able to bait those out. He's got some eggshell in here, and I don't put the big eggshell in my bin because it won't break down, and it'll just be floating around forever. I don't know what that is. That's some kind of seriously dehydrated, petrified, what is it, a potato? I think it's a potato. It's a little orange. Maybe it's a sweet potato. I don't know, but it's in there. We'll see if they can get it eaten. Another banana. Usually I cut the stems off the banana. Usually, yeah, that one's already off, so I'm going to go ahead and take it off. These take forever to break down, so I don't even put them in there. That's one thing I use my little bowl for, is for the little stem pieces of the banana. I've had it, I used to not take them off, and yeah, they take about a month to break down. It's not horrible, but when they get close to the broke down stage, they turn into these little hairs, and I mix my bin up every week, and then it spreads those little hair-like things around, and it kind of grosses me out a little bit when I get a bunch of hair-like things all over my hand. So that's the only reason, just a stupid little reason, but I think that's enough food for these guys in this bin. These potatoes are going to take forever, I think. The broccoli, it is pretty soft. They may be able to get through this, but usually broccoli is one that just takes forever. But this is already kind of in its rotten stage, full of moisture. Been frozen a few times, and yeah, we'll see. Maybe they'll get through it. Maybe it'll break down quicker. And another thing of coffee I think I'll go ahead and put in here. Just, now that is a lot of food, so I'll go ahead and cover that up. I'm leaving this whole half the bin to be able to escape if that stuff starts getting hot. And then I'll put the avocado skins pretty much right on top. Is what my plan is. That might be a little too deep. Oh, a tomato. I am being horrible with this camera today. Sorry about that. I'm too busy watching what I'm doing instead of watching where I got the camera pointed. Some paper out. I'll go ahead and get some new pieces to put down. I'll go ahead and leave these full though. Move this stuff over here. We can go ahead and cover this one up. I may not feed it today since it's still got so much in there. Alright, now to this one, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to feed over. I usually feed on the right side, so this time I'm going to feed over here on the left side. Now this bin here is quite a bit deeper than the other bin. Throw some coffee in there. Hey, there's some more avocados. Dump that out. There's 2 skins there. That'll be good. More bananas. It's a little harder to do one-handed. It's not going to break off there, so it's going in there. I never really looked to see what he has brought me until it's close to going in the bin. If there's something that I won't put in the bin, I'll usually catch it because I put it in piece by piece. I don't just dump it in. So I usually will catch things like if you put some full eggshells in there. Oh, everything's still frozen in the bottom of the bucket. Looks like some sweet potato. Let's see what we got here. Yeah, maybe some sweet potato, more coffee, more banana. Oops, sorry about that. Boy, that went everywhere. Bunch of funky, rotten juice everywhere, all over my clothes. Oh wow, that carrot's already nice and soft. They're gonna like that. They do like carrots, but if you put the carrot in fresh, it takes a long time for a carrot to break down. But it is cool to watch them eat a fresh carrot. If you put the carrot in whole, it takes a long time for them to get it done, but it is cool to watch how what the worms eat. The worms eat the slimy, decomposing matter. They ain't gonna come into this banana and just start taking bites of it. They don't have teeth. So as it gets slimy and nasty, that's what they eat. Everything they, whatever they can eat without teeth. So the food really has to be decomposing for the worms to to be able to eat it, you're not going to come find, out of a fresh carrot, little worm bites taken out of it. That carrot has to get slimy, and they'll come by and they'll eat all that slime off of it. And then as it continues to get slimy, they'll eat that slime, and then the next slime, and eventually the food's gone because the whole thing ends up getting slimy. And that's why you can have worms in your garden and you don't find your worms eating your plant roots, stuff like that, because the worms don't eat anything that's living. Only dead, rotten, slimy food. It's got to be decomposing. Oh, I imagine, like, if you had fresh, I don't know, let's say you had fresh lettuce and you put it in the blender and blended it to a puree, they would eat that. I don't know. It wouldn't be decomposing. It would just be mushy because you made it mushy manually. I don't know if they'd eat that or if they'd wait for it to turn rotten too. I've never tried it. I've ground food many a times, but I don't never ground it to a mush. I ground it into, more like ground beef, where it's little chunks. I want to call that good. Oh yeah, I can't believe I did that. Closed it all up without adding any grit. And the only reason I have to add grit is because I've been using eggshell. My farmer buddy's been bringing me all his eggs. And whenever I talk about those egg pieces and not putting them in my bin because they don't decompose, that's true. With the big eggs, they don't decompose. But when you grind that egg down into a powder, and the pieces are so tiny, they do decompose, and they don't hang around in the bin too awful long. So you do, if you're using eggshell, want to make sure you add some grit at pretty much every feeding, because it will decompose on you, and then your worms will be left with no grit. So typically what I've been doing, I just didn't do it in this little batch that I made here. This is all eggshell. But typically I put it in that container, and it's not only eggshell, I mix it 50-50 with ground eggshell and ground seashell, and then it's not so big of a deal if the eggshell does